All right, today, lesson 2B, which is the second day of adding rational numbers. Today we're going to go on to problems that involve multiple rational numbers instead of just two. We're going to deal with adding or finding the sum for 3 and 4 and 5 numbers. And we're going to utilize the strategy of the commutative or associative property, much like we did with our integer lessons a long time ago. All right, so a little bit of background knowledge. The commutative property says that order does not matter. In other words, if we have a problem with all addition or all multiplication, it's okay to add or multiply numbers out of order. We've done that many times. And once again, this allows us to change the order of numbers in addition or multiplication problems. And these are examples that we talked about in day number 1. It's okay to do things out of order if all you have is addition or multiplication. And then we also, in day number 1, we talked about dealing with just two numbers with adding rational numbers together by comparing the number of positives to the number of negatives that we have. And we're going to continue with that same strategy, but what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the commutative property to gather all of our positives together and gather all of our negatives together and then compare them. So here is number 1. And we will do this one together, and then I will have you try one at a time. So it says, find each sum, explain why the sum is what you say. We have negative 12.4 plus negative 6.8 plus positive 15.5 plus negative 2. If I'm doing a problem like this, I'm going to utilize the commutative property. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather all my negative numbers together, and these three numbers are my negative numbers, and I'm going to gather all my positive numbers together, and then I will compare them. Well, there's nothing to combine with the positive 5.5, so let's just deal with our negative numbers. So we have our negative numbers. We have 12.4 and 6.8, and then this negative 2, we of course should turn it into a decimal like we normally do when we add or subtract decimals. So when we gather all of our negative numbers together, we can see that we have, there's 9, 11, we can see that I have 21.2 negatives. So basically, I have 21.2 negatives plus 15.5 positives. So what we've done here is we've simply turned this into a problem like we did last week in the last lesson. We're turning it into a two-digit, or not two-digit, but a two-number problem there. So once again, gather our positive numbers together, gather our negative numbers together, and I'm going to let you finish it from there. All right, with what we have here, do we have more positives or more negatives?
More negatives.
And that's the number that we should always write down first. So we have 21.2, and we don't have our chart anymore, but I'm going to still do this kind of problem the same way. We have 21.2 negatives and 15.5 positives. We know we have more negatives, so the sum is negative, but now the question is how many more? And if we set everything up like this, to find out how many more we have of one thing than another, we simply need to subtract the two numbers, and that would be 5.7 more negatives than positives. So I concluded that the sum is negative 5.7 or negative 5 7/10. All right, everybody please try number 2. All right, let's take a look at this one. We should gather all of our positive numbers together and then gather all of our negative numbers together. Notice that I just do this the same way that I did when we were combining like terms. So how many positives do I have all together here? Yes?
Negative 4.59.
4.59, good. That's how many positives we have. I could show the work down here if I wanted to, but we should be able to figure that out. And then how many negatives do we have altogether?
14 and 110.
That's how many negatives we have? No. How many negatives do we have? 13.29. Good. So we have 13.29 negatives. Okay? Do we have more positives or more negatives? More negatives. So somewhere, 13.29 negatives, only 4.59 positives, and then from there we need to figure out how many more negatives we have than positives. Ella?
Negative 8.70.
Say that again.
Negative 8.70.
Do we need the zero at the end? How would we say that the correct way?
Negative 8 and 7/10.
Okay, very good. And we'll work on the sentence frame a little more for number 3 and number 4, but I believe that the sum is negative 8 and 7/10. Gather your positive numbers together, gather your negative numbers together, and then compare them. All right, everybody, please try number 3. So if we gather our negatives together, we have 350.98 negatives. And our positives, we have 421.34. And if we sort of set this up, we have 421.34 positives. Obviously, we have more positives than we do negatives. And that's what we need to figure out. How many more positives do we have than negatives? That's the key. Lizzie.
I determined that the sum is 70 and 36 hundredths.
70 and 36 hundredths. Let's see if that is correct. It is correct. Very good. 421.34 minus 350.98 is 70.36, or 70 and 36 hundredths. Everybody now do number 4. All right, so we gather all of our positives and negatives together. The negatives, negative 21.72 and negative 35.00 is negative 56.72. And then we gather our positive numbers together. 18.90, 33.00, 19.38. I changed the decimals in 18.9 and 33 because of the 19.38 to make sure that we had an equal number of decimal places. But when we gather all of our positives, that's how many positives we have. And we have 14.56 more positives than negatives. So I concluded that the sum is 14 and 56 hundredths. Now, every single problem I've put up here, how about with a number line? I just want to talk about that really quickly. So if we had a number line, and here was 0, and we started at that number right here, this would tell us to go to the right and keep going right 71.28 times. Well, that would take us past 0, and where it ends right here would have to be at 14.56. Now, obviously, that would be fairly complicated with a number line because we would have to divide up our number line into hundredths, which would take a while to do. It's much easier to just add all of our negatives together and our positives and then compare them. All right, let's go to the back side of your notes. We have 2 problems left. Number 5, it says Jenna has $125.76 in her account. She deposits $45.90 and withdraws $80.02. If you don't know, withdraw means to take it out of the account. Later, she returns to withdraw another $40.50 and deposits a check for $256. Well, if we can figure out which numbers represent positive numbers and which numbers represent negative numbers, it's really no different than 1 through 4. So let's go through this number by number. The $125.76, is that a positive number or a negative number? Positive. Okay, so I'm going to write a little positive just so I know that. The $45.90, is that a positive or a negative?
Negative.
Well, some of you are not sure. She deposits. That means she puts another $45.90 in her account. So what would that mean? Positive. Withdraws $80.02. Is that positive or negative? Yeah, she's taking it out. Later she returns to withdraw another $40.50. Is that positive or negative?
Negative.
And then deposits a check for $250. Positive or negative?
Positive.
All right, so if we sort of wrote this out, we'd have $125.76. That's a positive. And then $45.90. That's a positive. And then withdraws, and if we want to, we could put plus negative $80.02. And then withdraws another negative $40.50. And I'm kind of out of room here, but then it would be plus 250. So let me take that off and type it out like this. Positive 125.76 plus 40.90 plus negative 80.02 plus negative 40.50 plus 250. Now you take it from there. Gather all your positives together, gather all your negatives together, and let's figure out what she has left in her account. So we gather all of our positives together, and when we do that, we would have 421.66 positives, and then we gather our negatives together. That's 120.52 negatives. Obviously, we have more positives than we do negatives, and we have, in fact, 301.14 more positives than we do negatives. So I believe that the sum is $301.14. And everybody try number 6, same type of problem. So let's compare. When we gather up all of our positives, let me write all these down first. We have 132.32 positives. When I add $84.09 plus $19.23 plus $29. When I gather all my negative numbers together, in other words, the things that represent negative numbers, we end up with 92.86 negatives. Obviously, we have more positives than we do negatives. In fact, we have $39.46 or 39.46 more. So I determined that the overall change is $39.46. How many of you got that right? Raise your hand. All right, that's pretty good. All right, we are finished for today.